Hi guys, it's Dr. Ken Nordberg here again. Winter is struggling to stay alive here. We're getting flooded by slush and snow, even in my yard. I had a pond out in front of my garage threatening to take over my garage yesterday. But we're making it all right. Throat's a little scratchy today, probably from spending so much time outside yesterday. The last time I talked to you, we were talking about what to do at the end of a half day of deer hunting or buck hunting. And we had all kinds of alternatives, like staying put, especially if we're going to have midday feeding. But one of the big things that we do, my sons and I, is we scout at the end of our morning hunt between 11 and 12 o'clock, searching for next places to hunt. Two next places to hunt during the hunting season. We usually start that about the third or fourth day of the hunting season. In the earlier part, we have already selected places 2 to 3 weeks before the season started, and we kind of stick to those unless we find something interesting on the way to a stand site early morning or in the afternoon. But all those options are there. That one option, searching for new stand sites during the hunting season, is really important. And you have to be able to do it. I want to teach you how to do it without spooking deer. You want your bucks to stay in their home ranges throughout the hunting season, and it can be done. There's a few that refuse to cooperate, like those that might become nocturnal, breeding at night only, for example, and feeding, or a few that if they get tangled up with a human at very close range and become alarmed enough to raise their tail and bound away, they're probably gone for the season. But most of them will stay in place if you're a stand hunter and you do things right. So this is a really important, this is a kind of a turning point in stand hunting that makes you a buck hunter. But before we get to this business of how to scout during the hunting season, I want you to know what to scout for. And there are certain things that my sons and I, my 3 sons, and now my 3 grandsons as well, look for when scouting in search of places or stand sites to hunt older bucks. And there's a whole list of them. And I don't usually, you've never seen me with a list in my hand when I'm talking to you, but today, you look at this list, it's rather extensive, and they're all important items on that list. And I didn't want to miss any of them. And so I'm going to refer to this every once in a while I'm telling you what we look for. It's for stand sites. They're mature buck effective stand sites. So, the first item on here is locations. Now, you can hunt almost anywhere in the woods and hunt almost any way you want to hunt and still get a buck, but not very often. For that matter, most hunters are fortunate to take 1 or 2 what we would call trophy class bucks in a lifetime. And what's a trophy class buck? Well, it's a buck that you think is good enough to go to the taxidermist. That doesn't mean record book buck. It means trophy class. A really nice buck, big antlers, something to be proud of taking. So, your wife not being proud of him, but you know what I mean, that kind of buck, something big enough to be mounted. So, now, you can hunt, like I said, you can hunt in a lot of places, a lot of ways, and still take a buck, but not very often. If you want to become regularly successful at taking older bucks, these are things you have to be looking for. Now, there are 3 places in the woods that are especially good for hunting, where your odds are the very best for hunting older bucks. One of them is a well-used buck trail. Well, that might sound simple enough. Gee, hunt this trail, buck walks on this trail. But there are very few of them that are really productive. The reason is most deer trails are made by does and they're young. When you're out in the woods and you're a place where there's all kinds of deer trails here, they go every which way here. You're in a doe home range. When you're in a place where there aren't very many deer trails, you're between doe home ranges. Now, usually there are about 4, sometimes 5 doe home ranges within the average dominant breeding buck's home or breeding range. The buck's home or breeding range will be anywhere from about 600 acres, about a square mile in total area, to maybe 1,000 and sometimes more in some cases in size. But there'd be about 4 or 5 doe home ranges in there. Now, from about mid-October until January 1st, the end of the year, big bucks are going to be spending a lot of time visiting all those doe home ranges for various reasons. They'll be doing that during the 2 to 3 weeks before breeding begins in early November, where they're searching for does and estrus. They aren't in estrus yet, but I think they're expecting one or more of them are going to be in estrus pretty soon, but mostly to mark those ranges with antler rubs and ground scrapes. Older bucks make antler rubs and ground scrapes for 2 reasons. One is they like to do it. they like to joust now and then with a tree trunk, and some of them really get into it, grunting and snorting and just pounding away on that tree. But most of these are signposts. They're scent-laden, very visible signposts that tell other bucks, this is my breeding range and I want you to stay out of here. Well, even yearling bucks do that, but eventually all those lesser bucks that live within a buck's 600 to 1,000 acres is going to be chased out, at least by the time does start going into heat. They'll be chased out by that big buck. So anyway, then when breeding starts, that big buck is going to be spending all his time. There's 3 periods of breeding in a whitetail rut, in case you didn't know it. But 2 weeks in November, beginning early November, the buck is going to be spending all of his time cruising around those doe ranges, looking for does in heat, accompanying does in heat, always on the lookout for bucks that dare to sneak back into his breeding range and chase them off, and always looking for hunters. So they're so good at it that most hunters never see them. A lot of hunters hardly ever see a really older buck. That big dominant breeding buck, he's surely a trophy class buck. There could be 1 or 2 others living within his range. Buck ranges, by the way, overlap, and so you can have several. The younger bucks have smaller ranges, but the oldest buck, like the dominant breeding buck, has the biggest range. And he owns that territory, and he'll allow a certain number of other antlered bucks to live in his range, including the yearling bucks. Yearling bucks live on the ranges of their mother throughout their yearling year. So that's the smallest of the antler bucks. But 2.5 to 6.5-year-old bucks that just happen to be smaller and not as aggressive and as strong as one big dominant breeding buck, all can live. There's commonly 3, 4, 5 other antlered bucks living in a buck's home range, a dominant buck's home range. So it's a limited number of them. But while breeding is going on, there's one big trophy class buck living in that range, and and because each doe is only in estrus for 24 to 26 hours, and only 10% are in estrus on any one day, that big buck during that period of breeding, he could be in this little doe range over here one day, and then another one where that next doe is in estrus a mile away the next day. Makes them very unpredictable and hard to hunt. But there's these things that I'm going to tell you about make it easier to get close to big bucks every day. But anyway, the three locations that I started to tell you about are buck trails. And like I say, there aren't many of them. And bucks travel more than half the time during hunting season off trail to get around. And that's smart of them to do that. But anyway, well-used buck trails, that means lots of buck-sized tracks that are like 3 3/8 to 4 inches in length, and droppings 3/4 to 1 inch in length on a certain trail. And there's a lot of those tracks back and forth, and old ones, new ones. It's a buck trail. And I've had such trails pay off for me very well many times in the last 25 years. So that's one thing. Another one is a buck ground scrape. But there are only certain times a year when buck ground scrapes can be good. One is during the last 2 to 3 weeks of October, when bucks are making and renewing buck ground scrapes, marking their breeding ranges, and only occasionally after breeding begins. They don't have as much time, but when a buck renews a ground scrape in November, it's usually a dominant breeding buck, unless it's one of those lesser bucks off range. But usually that means that there's another buck nearby and a deer are nearby. But anyway, buck ground scrapes. And the third spot is a feeding area, currently favored by a big buck. And so you get 3 places, buck trails, ground scrapes, or a buck ground scrape trail, and a feeding area. Now, the feeding area is number 1. The reason being, during the course of any day during the hunting season, whitetails spend almost all of their time in 2 places. One is in bedding areas where they're very hard to see, and they can be difficult to even get to move when they're near bedding areas. You can walk within 50 yards of whitetails all the time that are bedded and not see them and not realize they're there unless you accidentally turn and go right toward them and they jump up and bound away. But hard to see them there. But when they're feeding, you can see them. They're moving about, they're standing up, moving around, and they feed in the morning and evening, and feeding areas are absolutely the most predictable places to find them. Although which feeding areas they're using can change a lot. You know, a big buck, he's going to be feeding in the feeding area of the doe he's with while breeding is in progress. So, but those are the 3 best places to be. So that takes care of location. Now let's get going here. Number 2 is the stand site. The best stand sites in the woods that we've found are the stand sites that were never used before. They're more than 100 yards away from any previous used stand site. A brand new one, never used. The reason they're good, they're the best, is because the big bucks don't expect you there. If you're a guy that puts a portable in a tree and then goes out and uses that the whole hunting season, well, every buck in the woods older than a yearling is going to soon find out, usually without you even knowing it, and they're going to be avoiding it, staying 100 yards or away from it for the rest of the hunting season. So when you use new stand sites, often, never used before, you're in the ballpark for taking a big buck. You're in a place, you catch them by surprise. So that's a really important place really important thing to think of and remember when you're scouting. Now, some of these things, next things, you probably never heard of before, but it's just common sense. For example, we look for stand sites that require very little or no preparation. Now, during the hunting season when we're scouting, starting the 3rd or 4th day, we're looking for places where we can use our stools. Stools make it easy to find and use new stand sites every day, twice a day even. A place where you can put your stool, carry your stool and put it down silently at the stand site. In a place where you have the best cover. You can find really wonderful cover. When you're sitting on a stool, it doesn't have to be really tall, although cover behind you has to be pretty dense. You want really dense cover behind you and cover in front to hide your body and your silhouette, everything except probably your head. So, but little or no preparation is best. The more you do at a stand site, the more construction, man-made construction that's there, the more things you cut down, saw off, branches, more of that you do, the more trail scent, lasting trail scent you're going to be plastering all over the site, the more likely it is the buck is going to find that thing even before you start hunting there and recognize that as a dangerous place to stay away from. The less you do, you know, if it's completely normal or natural cover, no changes made, and because you spend so little time there, you know, little or no preparation, you aren't going to be laying down all kinds of lasting trail scent in the area. The better it's going to be for taking a big buck. Now, when I mentioned that stand sites never used before, I should mention at least more than 90% of all the big bucks my sons and I have taken in the last 25 years or more have been taken at stand sites never used before. First time we ever used this. That's how good a first time use stand site can be for buck hunting. Now, another thing that you need is a place that you can get to without being easily seen or heard or smelled. You know, you got to have a trail that leads through dense cover right up to the stand site. Then once you get there, you got to have cover enough that enables you to climb up into a tree without easily being seen. You need big tall stuff around your stand tree that keeps you hidden while you're going up there. You need good cover all the way to your stand site. Whitetails might notice a motion or two in dense cover as you're getting there when you're getting close. But if it's really dense and they can't identify what that is that moves, and if the trail has been cleaned, you know, we use deer trails. That's another thing. We'll get to that. You need a quiet approach trail. Usually we use deer trails because they're already there. We can't, it's illegal to make our own trails in the woods, so we use deer trails and we clean them up. We get all the dead branches and twigs off the trails, especially within that last 100 yards on the way to your stand site. That should be fairly clean. So you need a quiet approach trail. So we look for that. This place might seem perfect here, but there's no trail. That's bad. You might decide, oh, I have to settle for something a little less over there, but I can use a deer trail to get there. Now, this is maybe the most important feature that you should have at a stand site. I've mentioned this before. I never sit anywhere in the woods as a deer hunter. I haven't done this for maybe 40 years. I never sit anywhere in the woods that is not within easy shooting distance of very fresh tracks and or droppings made by a big buck. Recently made, you know, tracks that are really fresh and big ones, you know. Boy, 4-inch tracks, that's the buck for the wall for sure. 1-inch droppings that are shiny, yeah, that's what you're looking for. If you're sitting somewhere else, that's crazy. You know, on any one day of a hunting season, that buck might be moving a lot, but only about 10% of that 600 to 1,000 acres it lives in. It's not going to be covering the whole area the whole time, just a little bit. And if you're not close to very fresh tracks of a big buck wherever you sit, you're wasting your time. So, that's important. We already mentioned a freshly made or renewed buck ground scrape. So you know about that. It's not good if it's not freshly made or freshly renewed. And it doesn't matter whether you're a bow hunter and you're watching one that was just made in October, or you're a gun hunter and you're sitting near one in November. If it wasn't freshly freshly made or renewed, you're wasting your time. Another feature of that though, when you're selecting a ground scrape, and you won't like this, it shouldn't be, it should not have been approached to within 10 to 20 yards by a human, a hunter. First thing, everybody hunts a ground scrape, first thing you want to do is put doe and estrus lure scent all around the spot. Which is kind of silly because the buck's going to come there anyway as long as he doesn't know a human there. Well, there's other things that might keep him away, like it's unseasonably warm or it's very windy, you know, winds in excess of 15 miles an hour or stormy. But the one thing that keeps most bucks from returning to previously renewed ground scrapes, which they usually renew every 24 to 40 hours, is the presence of a hunter. And you start spreading trail scent all around this thing. You're putting up this gizmo to drip doe and estrus lure scent on the ground scrape. That's totally unnecessary. That ground scrape is so important to that buck, he's going to get back to that regularly to tell all other bucks, I'm still here, I'm still boss of this area. You guys stay out or you're in trouble. And you don't need all that other stuff to get that buck to come to that ground scrape again, as long as he doesn't know you're there. So stay away from, will you find when you come through the woods and gee, there's dirt scattered way over to one side, the ground scrape over there, don't come any closer. If this happens in November, the first thing you should do is back away, groundwind, downwind or crosswind, and get behind some really good natural cover like a fallen tree or a lot of thick brush, something like that. And you don't have to see great, just watch that ground scrape, and all of a sudden, and I've had it many times, there's the buck, and he's adding scalp scent to an overhanging branch or something like that. But stay away from ground scrapes you're planning to hunt. Don't mess around. If you want to mess around with these other stuff, do it somewhere else, but not where you're planning to stand hunt near a ground scrape. Leave that ground scrape alone. Okay. Now, another thing, we've taken many bucks over the years after discovering tracks of a big buck that was dragging his host from track to track. Usually we set up a group hunting method when we find them, like cover all bases buck hunting or our gentle nudge hunting method, and we've taken a lot of bucks using them. And usually when we hunt those kind of tracks, we hunt them close to a buck bedding area midday, or in feeding areas early in the day or late in the day. But those can be dynamite places to hunt. Well, those hunting methods are described in very minute detail in my newest book, my 10th edition, Whitetail Hunter's Almanac. And this list too, everything I'm talking about here today is explained in great detail in my book. You know, you're probably listening, how am I going to remember all this? Well, you need that reference book as you, this book. Consider your textbook of this buck hunting school I've been putting on here lately, and for the future. And this is going to stay, you're going to just be glad you have something like that to refer to the rest of your life as a deer hunter, believe me. I've been doing it for so long myself. So anyway, let's say, you know, when I talk about tracks and droppings and things like that, they were easy to find when there's snow on the ground. You know, boy, there they are, easy to spot. But let's say late one year you hunt, there's no snow on the ground all through November, and leaves have fallen, and hard to find tracks and droppings of big bucks in that case. In fact, if it's like that, it's probably been unusually warm, and there's not even, when it's like that, there may not be many ground scrapes and antler rubs in the woods as well. You're wondering what to do. Well, the next best thing to do is hunt at feeding areas that are currently being favored by mature does and they're young. And midday, if you walk out into one, which you shouldn't do, but you want to know, see, are does feeding here? If you didn't see them there earlier, but are does feeding, you'll find fresh tracks and droppings made by mature does and young, meaning all the tracks will be shorter than 3 inches or shorter, down to 2 inches for little fawns. And the droppings will be anywhere from a ½ inch for mature does and yearling bucks, which will be feeding a lot with their mothers, down to fawn size droppings, 1/4 inch in length. So if those signs are there, that's a good place to hunt. Now, what you're doing there is hoping that that doe that's feeding there now is going to be an estrus when the sun comes up in the morning and you're there and they are feeding. And if it's in estrus, if it's in heat, the dominant bearing buck of the area is going to be with her. The odds aren't bad when you consider there's only 4 to 5 mature does living in that buck's range. The odds are 1 in 4 to 5. Probably a little better, because half of the yearlings in that range, that buck's range, are does, and yearling does will be breeding as well during that 2-week breeding period. So you got let's say you had a doe and say its yearling was in estrus at the same time. Doesn't happen really often, but you've got more than one doe in estrus in that feeding area in the morning. Oh man, there's going to be a buck there. If you don't see it by noon, I would suggest you better stay there the rest of the day. Don't take the chance of spooking those deer coming and going. Stay there in your stand, because sometime very soon that big buck is going to show up. He can smell a doe in the heat a mile or more away, probably 2 miles. My dog can smell a female dog in the heat a mile or more away. He's proven it several times. It was such a problem I had to have him neutered finally. But they can smell that pheromone quite a ways off, so they'll be there. So anyway, that's not a bad thing to do if you have nothing else no other reason to hunt in a certain place. Hunt where does are feeding every day, twice a day. One other thing, I've mentioned it before, and I've done a lot of research, is when you select a stand site, the stand site you're looking for shouldn't be right on the edge of the feeding area. It should be back in timber, 10 to 20 yards. Good cover back there. Be under cover of big trees, dark shadows during the day, helping to hide you while you're in there, especially with your camel head net on. But the effectiveness of a stand right at the edge of a clear cut or a farm field drops off really quick. One that's back in the woods a little ways with good natural cover on it, that can last quite a while. At least it could last once a year, every year for several years. Or, you might leave it alone for 3-4 years and then decide, I haven't hunted that for a while, go back there. There they are again. It's like starting all over from scratch. But as long as your stand site is not right at the edge and with natural openings out to where you expect to see the deer. So there you are. There's the page. Now, like I said, it's going to be hard for you to remember all these things, I'm sure, and you might want to watch this particular YouTube presentation several times to get it all and take notes while you're doing it. But everything you need to know about all these prerequisites of a mature buck effective stand site is covered in great detail in my newest book. And you really need to have that book so you can remember these things, because who knows how long I'm going to be around. Gee, 84 years old almost, might not be doing this much in the future. But take advantage of what we've learned, all the research we've done, and do that. Another thing, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free, doesn't take much time, and I'd appreciate it very much if you do that. And you'll receive a message every time I post a new YouTube presentation right away. So, but that's good for me. I'm getting up there in numbers, and that helps a lot. In fact, I'm getting up to 2.5 million minutes of people watching my presentations. So I guess I'm doing something right. I'm proud of that. I really am. But be sure to subscribe right there, that subscribe button, that red button right below it. So thank you very much. I'll see you again soon, and next time we'll get started on cruising in search of new stand sites during the hunting season without spooking the bucks you'd like to take. See you then. Be sure to visit my website. Here's the link. Here you'll find links to my blog posts, my Twitter account, my YouTube account, my Amazon store with links to my ebooks, my son's eBay store, a money saver if you're ordering from Canada or other countries. And be sure to sign up for my email updates. Here you will also find deer and bear hunting articles, my website bookstore, and much more.